Welcome in to another episode of Discard for Magic. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron.
I'm the other host, James or Jexic, and today we're going to be bringing you another tier list, but it's going to be the fun tier list.
All about what we enjoy playing the most. Buckle up and hopefully you agree with a couple.
So just in general, we're going to not do the A minus A plus thing like we did with the power tier list. It's instead going to be basically S tier factions we could play hundreds of times and keep coming back. A tier is, what we're in the game for, essentially. B tier is solid fun. C is like not necessarily a favorite. We'll probably pass on them a lot of times. And then D tier is like, I'd rather just play another game at that point. I love Summoner Wars, but you know what? If this comes up in my random faction generator, I'm probably going to delete the game. So there we go.
We're going to be going again by release order. So we'll start off with the factions that, even though they're in the master set, they were the first to be in that beta with the Cave Goblins and the Breakers. And let's start with the Breakers.
All right. So for me, I have them kind of right in the middle at the B tier. I think they've got a lot of nice ability to kind of go from offense to defense and that kind of thing, but they tend to be a little more defensive, and I'm not the biggest fan of hanging back and the way that a lot of people end up playing them. So I got them as B.
I have the Breakers as C tier. They're one of my lowest factions because I just really don't enjoy playing them that much. All the ranged game and the movement tricks can be fun, but I often find that I'm just not enjoying the pushing around and the mind witches, and I don't know. They're just not my cup of tea.
That's fair. So next up, we got the Cave Goblins, which should be no surprise to many of our listeners, but they were one of my favorite in first edition, and they just got even better in second edition. So I've got them at S tier. They're one of the most fun factions. They really lean into their zero cost theme and mechanics, and it just works great. Yeah, what about you, Aaron?
I think this will be the first one we agree on. I have them at S tier, one of my top factions. I love playing the Cave Goblins, just pouring out hordes of units and trying to find those little creases to get through your enemy's defenses, whether you're throwing a clinger down there and clinging 3 times and stuff like that. I just enjoy a lot. Sneaks is so much fun going in and out of the fray. And I think this is even augmented for me a little bit because they're one of my favorite decks to play in deck building. So I think that might change the rating just a little bit and improve it because of the fact that I enjoy them in that aspect as well.
Next up, looks like we got the Fallen Kingdom. This is probably be a big point of contention here. But how about you go first? Well, we'll start on the good side of the Fallen Kingdom.
So I have them as towards the bottom of my A tier. I love the Fallen Kingdom. I love some aspects of their game a whole lot. The biggest being Purge. I think Purge is one of the most fun cards in the game, especially with all the tricks that Fallen Kingdom have, with archers bouncing all around and warriors boosting up. I think Purge is super fun. But the rest of the deck I'm fine with, and I think that there's too many times that they're not as fun to play because the deck doesn't work intended, because you get either hand clogged or can't really use the champions or different aspects of the deck that aren't great. So I think that is what keeps them from S tier in my mind for fun. But I love Purge. Purge is what puts them up to A for me. If they didn't have Purge in the deck, Blood Summon can be fun, and I know some people love a good Blood Summon turn. I don't get the same enjoyment out of a Blood Summon turn that I do out of a Purge turn. And so I think without Purge in the deck, it would probably drop them a tier or two for me, but Purge is what keeps them at an A tier for me.
They're actually one of my lowest. I've got them as D tier because not my thing. And also, I feel like you were saying with Purge and Blood Summon, I feel like to get the most out of the deck, you basically have to know weird little loopholes to play them properly. And I feel like if you did some of this stuff in a game against a new player or someone you were teaching the game to, they'd be like, that's not how that works. That can't be how that works. That doesn't make sense. So it has some of the most unintuitive rulings and the ways to play. And it's just and their champions are bad, and I like champions. So I just feel like every time I play them, I'm just like, no, why is this coming up in the league? Yeah, so I'll be short on that one.
All right, so next we have the Polar Dwarves. I love the Polar Dwarves. Polar Dwarves have always been one of my favorite factions. They were they've had a lot of changes. I won't go into all those, but current iteration, still really enjoy the Polar Dwarves. I love like the parapets and the building your fortress and the big ice ram turns. And their champs are a lot of fun. Basically every aspect of the Polar Dwarves I get a lot of fun out of, and so they're S tier for me.
I've got them at A tier for a lot of reasons you list. Like, there's just a lot. They're pretty flexible in the way you can play them. After they've been kind of brought down to earth with the nerfs that happened, you don't feel bad playing them either against people. They just kind of have their own cool way of playing. Like when the game first came out, they were probably my favorite deck or one of my favorite decks, and I kept saying Polar Dwarves are the coolest before I knew how broken they were. I was just like, I thought they were cool, so I got them in A tier. After the Polar Dwarves, we have the Savannah Elves. I've got Savannah Elves also in the A tier. There's nothing more fun with them than just like loading up a ton of boosts and getting a nice chant of power double attack off with Makenda Rue or Archer, or those cool entangling combos. There's a lot of neat little tricks with them. And it helps that they're just like generally solid, and you never feel like you're out of the game with them. Yeah, they're fun.
For me, Savannah Elves are coming in the first at B tier for me. I enjoy the Savannah Elves. I think they're pretty fun. I just think they're very straightforward, and I think they're mostly fun, but I think for the most part their boost engine, maybe I just haven't played them enough lately. I think their boost engine is just more vanilla. They're just good fun, but they're not on the higher tiers.
The last one from the Master Set is the Vanguards. They got buffed a while back. I've got the Vanguards clocking in at B tier. I like playing with like Colleen and some of the Knights and stuff like that, and even trying to get some of their lesser used champions and units into the fray. But at the end of the day, they're pretty straightforward. And sometimes it's nice to have a straightforward deck, just turn your brain off and win a long econ game. But they don't have like the fun creative plays that some of the other decks do. So I've got them at B.
Yeah, I have them coming in at C tier for a lot of the same things you mentioned. I really enjoy like some of the fun creative plays, and they just don't really have them. They're very straightforward. They're not a bad deck anymore. They get out a lot of knights and usually get out Colleen, and they'll just slowly chip away at you until you've seen your 18th knight, and that's just about how it goes. But besides like Renew Hope, which I think is a fun card, they don't really have a lot of like fun cards in the deck. It's just very standard. This is what you're gonna get, and it's a straightforward deck.
Next up, we're gonna move on to the starter set factions. The first one being the Phoenix Elves. I've got them at B tier as well. They're like a great faction when you're just kind of like learning to play, I think. And they've got some good ability to go on the offense or defense with their events, and like their ability to keep pulling units up with Maldari's ability. But they're not setting the world on fire, even though that's kind of their thing.
I agree with you here also. I have them at B tier. I think they have some fun little tricks they can do, and like getting a Divine Rat with a Spirit of the Phoenix combo is always a fun aspect. But a lot of their fun tricks are defensive, and sometimes opponents just avoid them, and that makes it less enjoyable when you're like, man, I had this super cool turn I set up, and my opponent just walked away and took one inactivity
Or
damage.
destroyed your gates, and you're like, oh no, I can't summon.
Yeah. And so they don't force the opponent to do some of their big stuff, but which because they're defensive is tough. And I think they're balanced well, so I don't think they should force their opponent to go into those Spirit of the Phoenix Divine Ret turns. But when you set up a cool turn and it doesn't actually do that much, I dissuade your opponent from doing anything. Like it feels a little bad, but I do like some of their cards. I think the summoning off different units is fun. Ember Beast can be real fun. Fire Drake, when you get them out, real fun. But overall, B tier for me.
So Tundra Orcs. I have them actually surprisingly at A tier. I think they're solid, and I like them better in deck building. So deck building, they'd be an S tier for me, but in the base decks, like sometimes you just, I don't know, you can't do what you want, and there's certain cards that are less useful or just will make you lose when you think you have a good play that's gonna make you win. So like, oh, I'll do For Glory and this and that, and then you just don't get what you want. But I do think that like influence is a great ability, and it's nice to be able to re-roll your dice and get the rolls you want a lot of the time. So I've got them at A tier.
And I have Tunjorks coming in at C tier. They are a deck that I think, much like Vanguards are fairly straightforward. They have some fun aspects, I think, but most of those fun aspects can leave like your summoner very exposed, or like when used to the biggest outcome can really hurt you. For example, Primal Fury, if you're pushing up with it, can be really fun, but also it can leave you really exposed. And for Glory, can be a super fun card, but also when it goes poorly, can leave you with no units protecting you. And the rerolls definitely can help. And I really like Brutal Force, but besides that, I don't have a whole lot of love for any of the cards. They're fine. Like I don't love super fighter rolls where you go for 16 attacks and you just keep rolling the fury dice, and I have no strong feelings about that. And then the rest of their commons I think are fine also. And their champs I don't feel that strong about either. Like rolling in 8 dice with Shank can be fun, but you're most of the time just hitting like 2, so it's not that fun most of the time. Occasionally it can be real fun, but so overall C tier for me, just they're fine.
Coming up next, we're moving to the first factions that were released in their own little decks. Starting with the cloaks. For me, are C tier. I loved them in first edition, but in second edition, they have the same core mechanic of Vlox can copy anything. But I think what happens is there's two things with this. One, I think their turns are sometimes so complicated. You're like, there's got to be a way I can just like win here, and it takes a while to sort out, and you're just like kind of frustrated with yourself. And then the other half is that one of the best plays with them is really boring on the other end of the spectrum, and that you just kind of get a machinist out, park them with hand cannon and moto boots, and just do this thing that just seems like it shouldn't be there, and it just seems like a kind of like an oversight. So like they're not the most fun for me either to play or against, I think.
Yeah, I understand that. I have them coming in as A tier, but Final Form Phlox aside, I love a lot of the other aspects of the deck. Like Dagger is one of my favorite champions, and getting off like an Out of Shadows turn where like you didn't think you were going to be able to get to somebody with Dagger, but you like attack with a gunner, and then you shove Dagger 2 spaces down, and then you get behind somebody with Dagger. Like stuff like that is super fun for me, and that's why I have them at A tier.
Next up, we got the Sky Spear Avians. I've got them in the A tier. I feel like they just make every game more fun that they're involved in, and they just kind of have cool movement abilities, and it's fun to just have that level of freedom in terms of your movements, and they can kind of turn on a dime from playing the range game to just suddenly being in your face and with a Sky Assault and going for the summoner. So they're just kind of a neat, flexible faction that I enjoy playing, and they make games fun, I think.
I have Sky Spear Avians coming in at B tier for me. This is a bit of a personal problem, and like I think the deck's fun, but some of the flashes of it I don't wow me. But this deck's expensive, and I hate discarding cards, and so I often find myself when playing this deck struggling to afford things, or like on the back foot because I didn't discard enough. And so that's just something I have to do better, but it still makes it a little less fun for me to play the deck. But there are some fun aspects. I think Wrath is real fun. Seru can be fun. Guilford bullying stuff is fun. All their champs are really fun. And then their commons are a little more vanilla. They're like not being able to be forced, and divers can come out and that can be fun, but the other ones are just like boosting attack and getting a better attack. So overall, they come in at a B tier for me.
Next up is the Eternal Council. These guys were a real slow burn for me when I first played them. They came out with the Fungal Dwarves, and both those factions seemed really complicated at first, and I was working a lot, and I was just like, I can't wrap my head around either of these factions, and I jumped into deck building at that point. Now I really, really like the Eternal Council, and I've got them in S tier. I think they can play well from the range game, and they also just like it's just fun to have Edea just get all these cool powers and just go crazy and just blow everything up. So I think she's a lot of fun once you kind of get over the hurdle of like, wait, how do all these events interact and how's it work?
Yeah, I have the Eternal Council at A tier. I think they're a lot of fun, and Idia getting the combo of like drawing a lot of cards and then getting insight to 8 attack, and then being also just blowing things up with Psi Assault and just blasting through units, and then being able to like walk back a little bit with advisors, I think is a real fun aspect. Some of their other cards don't see as much play or like aren't as fun. Like Mind Knights, I feel like aren't super fun. Like the shoving aspect's fun, and then like watching your opponent discard cards because they walk next to it isn't like, it's not super satisfying for me when I play it, but sometimes it's the right play, and I'm sure it's very frustrating for the opponent. And I feel like they have a couple cards like that, like Molnar. But I like Katu a lot and getting out the end game, buffing that up, and their events can be really fun. So, A tier for me.
I think you start the next one.
All right. Next one, we have the Fungal Dwarves, and this might be a surprise for people, but they're not S tier for me. I have them coming in at the A tier. I still, I don't know. I've cooled on the Fungal Dwarves a bit. I still really enjoy playing them, and they have some fun interactions. I love a good, like, infect turn, and popping carriers into beasts is always fun. But I always think back of what could have been, not with the balance changes that, like, the timing change, but carriers used to, like, rupture in succession, and that was a lot more fun for me personally. And also, they struggle with like draw a lot of the times, and they can have some really not fun games if you just can't find a beast or you can't find carriers, and that can just really hurt not only your game plan but also the fun factor when your deck is not working as intended. So that's some of the reasons I have them at A tier.
I've got them at C tier. Just cause yeah, I think that they've got some items in there that make you think the deck could play a certain way, but that's often the wrong way to go. And I'm talking about like Stim Shrooms and Demand. They're like, hey, I should just go in there and suicide on their summoner. And it's not. And it's just like I see these plays and they seem real clever, and a lot of times they won't pan out. But I do like that those cards exist because they, when a Fungal Dwarves get way ahead, they can actually use those cards to just close out the game. It's not like the Vanguards that will sort of just like make you wait, you know. So I do like that they exist, but I feel like the deck is sometimes pulled in different directions, and the main direction of like camping out, getting the boosts, I struggle to get that to work myself, and it's not really a thing I enjoy the most. So that's my Fungal Dwarves at C. Next up is the Obsidian Dwarves, the first faction in Wave 3. And I've got them at S tier. I'm sure it doesn't really surprise too many people. I think they're just super fun. You get a bunch of boosts, or you don't, but you know, you just kind of like got to roll with it and have fun. Between Volcanic Blast, Hellforge X, and they have really good champions. You're not afraid to burn cards. This might be another reason Aaron won't like them, because you do have to basically discard to play them. Like, you can't just hold on to everything. You kind of got to go in there and just see what works. Solve for the dead summoner if you can, because a lot of times the answer is yes, you can kill them if they're within your range. So I find them to be fun.
Yeah, I have them coming in at C tier. I don't love them as much, partly because I think Balzar is a bit unpredictable, and you can just have games that are fully determined by like how many specials you roll. You can have games where you completely dominate based off just Balzar rolling a ton of specials, and you maybe shouldn't have even won that game, but you just rolled super well. And you can have the opposite, where you roll so poorly that a game you should have won, you have no chance because you can't roll a special. I've had many an instance in which I was like needed to not roll 2 specials to gain like a boost or two to pull off a volcanic blast to win the game, and instead I rolled 2 specials on like 3 dice and didn't get the boost I needed to win the game. And stuff like that is just, it's tough because like when you have a cool combo, you want it to be a little more
Reliable.
yeah, a little more reliable. And I just feel like Obsidian Dwarves don't have that aspect. I also do struggle with the amount that I should probably be discarding in their deck, and that probably hurts their ranking a little bit for me. But Overall, they do have a couple fun aspects, but I just find that they're more fun in like deck building, like the axe.
The other half of the unofficial Fast and Furious set is the Sand Goblins. And the Sand Goblins were I've got them at A tier. I think they're close to being S for me, but because they're just a lot of fun. You could just look at their art is great, and just everything about them is just like these guys are just here to have a good time. They got those cool Mad Max vibes. They've got interesting card interactions. Like it shouldn't seem like Krusk at the 10 health with this carry ability that's not useful all the time would end up being one of the most powerful summoners, but they just have all these cool tricks, and it's just fun to like figure out what you can do on any given turn. One thing that might bring them down for a lot of people is that there's certain things that like once you do them, you can't undo your turn. So if you like when you discard a card off the top, so it kind of you got to watch out for especially the way Mortar works. You can misclick, and that'll kind of make some feel bad moments. But overall, they're a solid and fun deck, I'd say.
Yeah, another one we agree on. I have them coming in at A tier, also close to S tier for me, but just didn't make the cut. They have a lot of fun. I love the theme. I love like the bug biters, sending them in and throwing riders out there and going fast and furious, but sometimes the fast and furious bites you in the butt, and then you lose all your detonates and your silts, which is a really fun card also. Some fun aspects hurt some other fun aspects at times, but overall, I really like the deck. I think all the cards basically are pretty fun, and like having thrusters out there and super gate, all every aspect for the most part is fairly fun, but occasionally it just burning through stuff can really bite you in the butt.
Next up, we got the Shadow Elves. I've gotten C tier just because kind of similar to Cloaks in that I know they're good, but I also like don't always see the right lines with them, and it's just outside of my playing style to want to like hang back so much and like tinker with the boost and do all these things and kind of like damage your own stuff for benefit and then figure out the best play. Some people love that, and you know that really clicks with them. But Shadow Elves, they're not a deck that I'm usually reaching to play. But if they show up in my random generator, I'll be like, okay, I should learn these guys a bit more.
Yeah, another one we agree on. 2 for 2. I also have them at the C tier. I like them a little more than I did, which I mean they're one of my lowest decks, so that's not saying much. But the last game I played with them, I enjoyed them a lot more when I played them in the league. I don't almost ever pick them by choice. I struggle with playing the deck. One, don't really understand it that well, and two, I just don't do very well with the boost engine. I never have that much enjoyment from the deck. I also think it's a similar vibe to the Vanguards of like, hey, I'm just going to send 18 Seekers at you and we'll see if you survive, which for me is not as fun. I think they can have some fun instances when they get like their assassination plays with like glinting speed and like bouncing around and doing stuff like that. Overall, I just don't enjoy them that much. So C tier for me.
So now we'll wash that one out of our mouths with the Wayfarers, which I have as S tier because they're just super fun. Like trying to get to the back row and just doing all these things to just get to their summoner. You'll figure out there's gonna be a way to do it. You just gotta like figure out what the cards are. I do discard kind of heavily sometimes just to like if I have two of the same common, I'll often discard one just so they have my options open. And it's just kind of fun to just solve through that turn and figure out what you can do. But I've learned more recently that they are a bit more dynamic and you can kind of play back and then wait for the right time to pounce, and that's fun as well. I feel like if they made a graphic novel, they would be the main character in the game, and that's what I'm going to stick to.
Yeah, I mean, that's 3 in a row for us. I also have the Wayfarers at S tier. I think they're a blast between like slip by, sending Celeste through cracks that nobody should have gotten through. Or like Baldo is a ton of fun, bouncing all over the place. And like the movement tricks with Coordinate and like Adventurers and Gusto and the Voyagers, all of them, basically every card in this deck I think is a lot of fun. Even like Tess, who I don't play as much, can be super fun, especially if you have like a waypoint out there and then you're like triple shifting structures and stuff. And the entire deck is just a blast, and it creates a fun puzzle that there's always a really good turn that you're missing, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot. So S tier for me.
All right, next up, we have the faction that has the opposite symbols of the Wayfarers in the High Elves. And I've got them at C tier. Again, I think kind of similar to some of these other decks that are just a little tricky for me to play. I think they're very cool. I like the design of like your stuff works for me and vice versa. But I just struggled to wrap my head around some of their best plays. And sometimes like when it happens, you're just like, oh wow, I didn't even realize they could do that. Like with just the way that oblige and dictate can just like totally shift the way the board works. So that's maybe a me problem. I need to play them more, I think, to get my brain wrapped around them.
Yeah, they definitely can make the head hurt, and that's part of why I have them at B tier. I enjoy playing them from time to time, but some of those moves to wrap your head around, like what's going on, it just makes the brain hurt a lot. I was talking to Prophet the other day, and he didn't even want to play them anymore for a little bit because he's like they just make your brain hurt so much thinking about all the different aspects. But they can be really fun from time to time, and I like the like forcing abilities. So they're B tier for me.
Next up in that same release, we've got the Swamp Orcs. I've got Swamp Orcs at B tier. They're solid. They do really cool things with Muglug and their boost engine and everything, but it does kind of feel a bit one note. I mean, Vine Mancers are super fun and they do a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, like they're not as fun and dynamic as some other decks, but they're solid.
Yeah, I also have them coming in at B tier. I think they do have some fun aspects, and rolling big turns with Mug is like a fun experience, like chucking a ton of dice. But the building the swamp is just fine. I find a lot of times they, when played correctly, are just like hiding or like very in the back row, which isn't as fun of a game plan. Often kind of boring at times, just building boosts and waiting for the big turn with Mug. But they can have some fun aspects, and their champs are pretty fun. So B tier for me.
Next up, starting off wave 4, we've got the Crimson Order. I've got it C tier just because I don't really like really long games. And you play Crimson Order, it's probably going to be a long game unless the Crimson Order player messes up. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And that's basically it. And they kind of changed the way the magic economy works, which is neat. Some decks you get to play champions you wouldn't normally play, but then in some matchups like Cave Goblins, you're forced to play the Eater, who never feels good, and it's just
Yeah, I have them coming in at A. I like them a lot more. I think some of their events are a lot of fun. I like transfuse to work around different things. Whether you're working around aura from the high elves or working around different defensive aspects from different factions. I really like their champs can be a lot of fun. Casamira, getting more cultists out, and the cultists themselves I enjoy, and convert can be a great time. Only have them at A and not S because I think that some aspects of the deck can get a little boring at times, doing the same thing over and over again. But overall, I do enjoy the deck quite a bit.
continuing in wave 4. After the Crimson Order, we've got the Mountain Vargath. I've got them at A tier. I think there's just a lot of fun little things you can do with them in terms of, from Varn to martial forces and all the little movement tricks. They're a bit less straightforward than they at first appear, and they're cool. It's fun to just kind of get in there and bust people's gates or push people around and just muscle in with the goats. So I like them.
Yeah, in my opinion, the Vargrath have the movement tricks that the Vanguards wish they had to just make the deck a little more interesting. I love a lot of aspects of the Vargrath. I have them coming in at S tier. I love martial forces. If you have a glory caller or two in hand, that changes everything. You can do all sorts of fun movement tricks with that. Ramming advance can be a lot of fun. Even stronghold, you can have some really fun, aggressive plays with. I mean, pulling all your units back to a far gate is not super fun in my opinion, but like when you have a forward gate and you can shift your units around to sort of block things off or like get a better situation, stuff like that is really fun. I love Varn. Varn's great. Torridon can be really fun also when you get him out. Throwing people with brutes and fighters is also really fun. I just like a lot of aspects of this deck. I think it's a really fun deck.
Next up, we got one of the more controversial decks in a while in the Deepwood Groaks. I have them at B tier for fun because I do think they've got like that managing the boost economy and what to do with it and whether to play potions, and sometimes you might want to like risk it and keep some boosts on a warrior and have them see if you can get another good attack out of them. They're, I'd say, decently fun, but they do kind of have some salt on the other end sometimes because people just think they're too strong.
I also have him at B tier, another one we agree on. I really like the potion aspect, and I think that can be really fun. especially strong and swift potions. I think those ones are both really fun to play. The other two potions are fine, but the rest of it are like common units. While strong, I don't find them like super fun. Like the warrior is very straightforward, can attack for a lot, and you don't have to do that much to get it to attack for a lot. So it's not like a fun interaction with like the undead warrior where you have to like kill a lot of units to get it up and boosted, and that can be really fun with like a purge or something. It's just, hey, it can attack for a lot if you move boosts to it. Same with like the warden. It I don't find it that fun. It just protects and gains a lot of boosts if you have it in the back. And then seers are fine. They're really strong. They can attack from anywhere basically, and I don't find them that fun when I use them. Probably their favorite common of theirs that they have is the Mystic, in my opinion. I think that's the most fun because I like the aspect that you can add boost onto potions that are already there. And so I think that might be my favorite part of them. And then I do like some of their champs. I think Kalik can be really fun. And I think Mirrodin getting potions back can be really fun. But Eldareth is just kind of good and just like sits in the back and gains boost by not really doing anything. So again, not a super fun aspect in my opinion, but so I got them B tier also.
Next up, we got the Forged. I've got them in the A tier. I think they're just really unique in the way they work with you almost do all of your summoning in the build phase. It's a nice puzzle of what to do, and there's lots of cool plays with modular and mag cogs often combined. They're weird because like the sentry cogs make you think they're going to be a defensive deck, but that is not how they're usually played. You just kind of get in there, rush people down, blow stuff up, and they're just kind of a cool deck.
Yeah, they come in at S tier for me. I have two words for you. Magcog. I mean, come on. Magcog is like some of the most fun you can have in this game, especially if you throw a modular on it. Jumping all over with attract and then like swapping, that is just it's a blast. And Magcog, for that reason, I think boosts his deck up. Some of the other aspects of the deck I think are really satisfying and I do enjoy, like the Inventor's ability to like deal damage when you're placing structures and being able to like build in your entire deck essentially. I love both aspects of that, but I think Magcog is what seals this into S tier for me, especially with that modular upgrade. I think that is some of the most fun you can have in Summoner Wars, in my personal opinion.
Now we got the last two decks that have been released so far. We'll start with the Shimmer Sea Fae. I have the Shimmer Sea Fae in at B tier. I think they have a lot of cool stuff, and when it works, it feels good when you're just like doing all these cool things and getting your champs back and doing this and and like using Spearhead to attack diagonally from a safe position and all that kind of stuff. But I think the fact that they're so draw dependent, even though they have cards to let you draw more cards, you feel like you're not playing with what you want to be able to do. And they just kind of, I think that hurts them a bit. So I got them at B.
I also have them coming in at B tier for a lot of the same things that you mentioned. I like some of the moves they can have with like the scouts and different aspects of like getting units out in the attack phase and doing some fun combos like that. And like their champs can be fun, but overall, I don't find them super enjoyable. I mean, I think some of their cards are just not always useful, which might be part of it. Like Rebuke can be, even when in Rebuke is useful, it's not always that fun. It's fun if you're like finding like an end game kill with Rebuke. I think that's a fun aspect, but just like sending a card to the bottom of somebody's deck, not like crazy fun for me. And like some of their commons aren't like super fun, just a little vanilla, like drawing a card. So overall, B tier for me.
And lastly, we have the Storm Goblins. Do you want to go first with them again?
Sure. I debated the Storm Goblins a lot. I had them at A tier for a second, and then I moved them up to S, and I think I'm going to stick with them there because Circuit is just, it's kind of a blast. Even if I'm not winning the game, or even if I'm doing like terrible, I still enjoy connecting circuits. It's a fun mini game, and I don't know why it's so fun, but connecting things with vault swappers or like finding how you can create that giant line and then shock everything for one damage. Even on turns where it's not my best option, I still want to do it. every single time. I just want to connect the circuit. It's an urge that I have, and I think it's a really fun part of this deck, and it's a good time.
So now for me, when it comes to Storm Goblins, I agree that the circuit is a great concept. For me, what I think the kind of play it ends up generating a lot of the time is less interesting. Where you're like, oh, I don't want to summon champs or just going to summon a champ and just sit there. So it almost feels like first edition where it's like, I don't want to summon commons. I don't want to have a board state against them. And I personally like find the circuit building the way it works. Like if it was more like wind mages where you kind of push stuff and you lock and you click it in, it's like boom, I got a circuit now. That's cool. But instead it's just like, oh, I always have a circuit. I'm just gonna jump all these guys up and attack the summoner, and it just feels less interesting to me. So I actually have them at D tier, way on the other end. Storm Goblins, they're just like this mini game that almost feels like it's like analogous to Summoner Wars and doesn't always feel like I'm playing the same game anymore. But I recognize there are people like you who love that, so I'm glad it's in the game. It's just not my favorite.
Yeah, it definitely like different from Summoner Wars, and it changes the game a lot. Not always for the better, but I love how it clicks in. It's super satisfying to me. This is a deck that probably will cool after a while for me because of that aspect. And honestly, all these rankings will change sometimes even like week to week.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow you'll get sick of a deck or you'll want to break from a deck and you might find love with another deck that you didn't think you enjoyed that much. So they change constantly in flux. But right now, I'm still loving the Storm Goblins.
Colby, when he made them, he's like, these guys are awesome. And I do think the concept is great. The circuit thing and the way it works, like the word economy of it is brilliant. Some of the ways it plays out, I'm not a fan of. But we'd love to hear from all of you and what your fun tier lists are and whether you're more like me or Aaron in terms of your choices or somewhere completely different.
Yeah, let us know, and we'll chat about it afterwards. We'll post the tier list a couple days after we post the podcast with some spoilers so people can watch or listen to the podcast before they see all the factions and how we rated them. But let us know where you had similar factions you loved or where we picked your favorite faction and said we hated playing it. This has been another episode of Discard for Magic, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.